Listen, if you ever thought a fairy tale life was the key to eternal happiness, you're about to discover just how wrong that assumption can be. Imagine for a moment a woman who seemed to have it all: an aristocratic title, family wealth, an enviable position in society, and a sense of adventure that lifted her right out of the stifling expectations of her time. That was Lady Kathleen Cavendish, born Kathleen Kennedy, a member of one of America's most prominent families. Known for her charm, wit, and rebellious spirit, Kathleen lived a life that seemed full of privilege and grace. Yet beneath the surface, her journey was marked by heartbreak, defiance, and the infamous Kennedy curse. From her daring love affairs to her tragic and untimely end, Kathleen's story is both captivating and poignant. Join us as we delve into the remarkable life of this unforgettable Kennedy. Kathleen was born on February 20th, 1920, though many folks would come to know her as Kick because of her boundless energy and effervescent approach to life. She was the daughter of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, a couple whose drive for social, political, and financial dominance was already turning the family name into an American institution. This was the patriarch who would later become the United States ambassador to Great Britain from 1938 to 1940, and who carried enough power and influence to shape presidential candidates out of his sons. But at the time Kathleen was growing up, the Kennedys were riding a wave of prominence, rubbing shoulders with Hollywood stars and American magnates in ways that made them all but untouchable. Yet even from the beginning, tragedy lurked around every corner. As we dig into the family, we need to talk about just how intense and intimidating Joseph and Rose Kennedy could be. They weren't simply doting parents cheering at the sidelines of a soccer game. The Kennedys weren't just an Irish Catholic brood praying devoutly every Sunday. They also had a veneer of upright behavior. You can find plenty of interviews in which surviving family members discuss the pressures of meeting Joseph Kennedy's towering expectations. And for Kathleen, who had a rebellious streak from day one, meeting those expectations was a constant struggle. She was the kind of girl who, in other circumstances, might have been a bit of a tomboy, out climbing trees or cartwheeling across the lawn. She was nicknamed Kick because she never stopped moving. The hypocrisy, in fact, was glaring. For all Joseph Sr.'s emphasis on morals, he carried on extramarital affairs that deeply hurt Kathleen's mother, Rose. Rose Kennedy revealed that she was devoutly Catholic, a woman determined to keep up the facade of a perfect family, no matter what. She was also capable of shocking cruelty when a child's behavior threatened to tarnish that facade. Meanwhile, Joseph Sr., who was set in tabloids and whispered rumors to be entangled with Hollywood starlets, made no attempt to hide his philandering. According to some accounts, Joseph Sr. would flaunt his affairs, even bringing his mistresses around the children. Kathleen's father insisted that his children play innocently alongside the daughter of Gloria Swanson at a Halloween party, just so he could keep up the cover story that his relationship with Swanson was all above board and friendly. Among the saddest stories swirling in the Kennedy household was what happened to Kathleen's sister, Rosemary. Due to an intellectual disability, Rosemary struggled to keep up with her siblings in the rigorous environment of the Kennedy home. The family, determined to preserve their lofty social standing, hid Rosemary's condition. Joseph Sr. arranged for Rosemary to undergo a lobotomy in an effort to fix her condition. The operation was botched, leaving Rosemary severely incapacitated and unable to speak effectively for the rest of her life. It also hinted to Kathleen and her other siblings that anyone stepping out of line might be dealt with harshly, cast aside or hidden away if they didn't meet the family's rigid standards. Needless to say, this environment was suffocating for Kathleen, who was a lively, curious, fun-loving girl. She loved sports, jokes, and friendly competition, traits encouraged by her many brothers, especially John F. Kennedy, JFK himself, who was said to be quite close to her. Their bond apparently made them co-conspirators in adventures around the family home, from throwing the rowdy parties to sneaking around old Joseph's back to have a bit of harmless fun. Yet even JFK, who would become a war hero and eventually the president, was overshadowed by their eldest brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., who was meant to inherit the political ambitions of the father. In that swirl of big personalities, accolades, and ambitions, Kathleen found ways to stand out by virtue of her humor and sheer joie de vivre. Many acquaintances said that while she wasn't the most conventionally beautiful of the Kennedy daughters, some accounts describe her as having a slightly awkward stoop and frizzy hair. She had a warmth and a sparkle that pulled people in. She was that person at a party who could make anyone smile, who was always the first to break an awkward silence with a joke, and who exuded an almost fearless determination to enjoy life. That determination often clashed with her mother's more conservative views, particularly about men. Kathleen was at that precarious age where she found herself drawn to the attention of her brother's athletic friends, and she reveled in the flirtations. It wasn't scandalous behavior by most modern standards, kissing, dancing, going to the beach, maybe a bit of hand-holding. But in the straight-laced Kennedy household, Rose was alarmed that Kathleen was developing a robust social life that threatened the squeaky clean image the family wanted to project. Desperate to keep Kathleen's passions in check, Rose sent her daughter off to an all-girls convent school, presumably to tamp down those youthful urges and divert her mind to more pious concerns. Yet as we can glean from diaries, letters, and interviews with friends of the family, such an environment only stoked Kathleen's rebellious spirit. She followed the rules outwardly, but her mind remained fixed on independence, fun, and the wide world beyond the convent walls. Her mother hoped that by the time Kathleen finished her education, she would be tamed. Instead, Joseph Sr. was appointed the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain, and the entire family relocated to London, except for those children who stayed behind in American boarding schools. Kathleen, at 18, headed across the Atlantic with her parents. This was 1938, a pivotal time for Europe. War loomed on the horizon. Tensions were building, but London's high society was still throwing lavish balls, and the young debutantes of the day were being presented in a swirl of dance cards, candlelit banquets, and gossipy outings. Kathleen adored it. She attended the prestigious Queen Charlotte's Ball and was named the debutante of 1938 by the local press. London's aristocratic circles and tabloids alike took notice of her American verve, describing her as bubbly, fearless, and refreshingly candid. She didn't shrink from the old-world pomp. Instead, she embraced it, engaging in witty banter with dukes and earls, forging fast friendships with English girls her age, and even catching the eye of some very eligible young men. It was a dream come true, and it seemed that at last Kathleen had found a stage big enough for her personality. But history had other plans. In 1939, Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, and World War II broke out. Kathleen, who happened to be traveling in France at a friend's family estate when the news reached her, had to rush back to England and figure out what to do next. It was a terrifying moment. Germany was making swift moves across Europe, and there was talk that London itself might become a target. No doubt Joseph Sr. had political concerns about staying in Europe. The safety of his children was at stake. The Kennedys ultimately made the decision to return to the United States in the fall of 1939, believing it was too risky to remain. Kathleen had no choice but to go, though she desperately wanted to remain in the city that had stolen her heart. She was heartbroken, not just because she was leaving behind an exciting life, but also because she had formed attachments to certain English acquaintances, possibly even romantic ones her parents didn't fully know about. Once back in America, she drifted. She attended a few colleges, dropped out, wrote for newspapers for a time, and generally flitted around the edges of East Coast society. But none of it compared to London. Letters she wrote around that time, referenced in a variety of Kennedy biographies and archives, reveal her restlessness, her longing for that sense of freedom she experienced among the English aristocracy. So in 1943, with World War II still raging, she did something bold. She signed up to work for the Red Cross, specifically focusing on servicemen in Britain. War or no war, she was going back to the place she loved. And it was there that she reconnected with an old friend, the reserved but wealthy William Billy Hartington, officially the Marquis of Hartington and future Duke of Devonshire. From a purely practical standpoint, Billy was the perfect match for Kathleen if she was looking to maintain the kind of status her family would approve of. His lineage was impeccable. The Cavendish family was among the highest ranks of British nobility. The Duke of Devonshire line owned Chatsworth House, an estate that's a bit like Downton Abbey times 10, featuring an enormous mansion, priceless artwork, and rolling acreage. The earls and dukes in that lineage had mingled with British monarchs and statesmen for generations. Yet there was one nearly insurmountable obstacle. The Hartingtons were Protestant, and the Kennedys were deeply Catholic. While that might not seem like a big deal to many of us now, it was definitely a big deal to Rose Kennedy. She wouldn't hear of Kathleen marrying a Protestant, especially one from an old-money English family. This wasn't just about religion for Rose. It was about identity, tradition, and the Kennedys' sense of themselves as a pioneering Irish Catholic dynasty in a society that still contained undertones of prejudice. Compounding this was Rose's personal devotion to the faith. She spent hours praying for guidance, hoping her daughter would see the light and end this relationship. But Kathleen and Billy grew closer and closer, forging a bond that went beyond class or religion. They were simply in love. Soon enough, Billy proposed, with a major condition: their future children would be raised Protestant. This was the red line for Rose, who found it an affront to everything she believed in. Naturally, the proposed marriage sparked a major family feud. Rose tried to separate the lovebirds, sending letter after letter to Kathleen, employing guilt, moral arguments, and dire warnings about the state of Kathleen's soul. But Kick, stubborn as ever, went through with the wedding. On May 6, 1944, she and Billy married in a relatively simple civil ceremony. It should have been a triumphant moment, but heartbreakingly, only one member of the Kennedy family attended: her eldest brother, Joseph Jr. Everyone else boycotted it. The bride's parents were conspicuously absent. Kathleen might have hoped that once the wedding was over, everyone would calm down and accept it. But the truth is that fate had a far more tragic path in store for her. World War II was still raging, and Billy, as a son of an English noble family, felt duty-bound to serve. He joined the British Army, was posted to the front lines, and was soon deployed to France and Belgium. The newlyweds barely had time to enjoy married life before Billy shipped out, leaving Kathleen in London to worry each day about whether she'd hear from him again. At the same time, the Kennedy family was struck by unspeakable tragedy. In August 1944, just a few months after Kathleen's wedding, her brother Joseph Jr. died in a plane explosion during a top-secret mission over the English Channel. The Kennedys were devastated, and Kathleen herself felt that blow deeply. Joseph Jr. had supported her marriage, walked her down the aisle, and was presumably the only familial ally she had left who really understood her rebellious spirit. Now he was gone. Yet the horror continued. In September 1944, news arrived that Billy, the Marquis of Hartington, had been killed by a sniper's bullet while his unit was liberating a town in Belgium. At just 26 years old, Billy was ripped away from Kathleen less than 5 months into their marriage. For a woman who had once been the toast of British society, this was nearly too much to bear. She'd lost her brother and her husband in quick succession, and the Kennedys, for the most part, still weren't on speaking terms with her. She gave permission for Billy's body to be buried near where he fell, and that meant she never saw him again, never had the chance to bring him home. The heartbreak was almost unimaginable. In just a few months, her entire world had shattered. One might assume she would return to America, live quietly with her family, and mend fences. But again, we're talking about Kathleen Kennedy, Kick, the unstoppable, vibrant woman who'd always refused to stay put in the shadows. She did go home for a while, but she never felt settled. Eventually, she made her way back to England, where she launched herself into the social scene with a renewed determination, perhaps as a way to block out her grief. She was still Lady Hartington, after all, with a courtesy title from her late husband, and she used it to move through aristocratic circles, frequenting parties and making new connections. Friends and observers commented that she seemed to be burning the candle at both ends, dancing her nights away while trying to outrun the sadness that haunted her every waking hour. And that was when she encountered the next great scandal of her life. She met and fell in love with Peter Wentworth Fitzwilliam, the 8th Earl Fitzwilliam, who used the additional courtesy title Viscount Milton. Now here was a man who seemed dashing and exciting, a soldier himself with a heroic war record, a massive fortune even more immense than Billy's, and a rebellious streak that seemed to match Kathleen's own. The trouble? He was very much married to Olive Plunkett, though that marriage was in tatters, riddled by Olive's struggles with alcoholism. Nevertheless, a taboo affair was a taboo affair, and the Kennedys, devout Catholics that they were, found this relationship completely unacceptable. If they'd had difficulty swallowing a Protestant match, they found a married Protestant aristocrat more than they could stomach. Rose threatened Kathleen with outright disownment if she followed through, and married the Viscount. By this point, though, her mother's threats had lost their power. Kathleen had already lost so much, and she was determined to grasp happiness wherever she could find it. What she found, however, was a dangerously flawed man. Fitzwilliam was notorious around London for heavy drinking and gambling. Newspapers at the time frequently published gossip about his nightly outings, the money he lost at the casinos, and the glamorous women he escorted around town. In diaries and letters from Kathleen's circle, it's clear she herself knew he was bad news, nicknaming him Rhett Butler after the famous protagonist in Gone with the Wind, a character known for his roguish charm and questionable scruples. But she couldn't help herself. She wanted to marry him, convinced that love would prevail over scandal. The only stumbling block was the pesky matter of his existing marriage. Fitzwilliam assured her he'd arrange a divorce, and that soon she could be his countess. Smitten, Kathleen believed him. If you look through archives in places like the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, you'll find letters and photographs capturing that spirit. Photographs of her wearing a simple sweater, leaning casually on a railing in London, exuding a confidence that just wasn't commonplace for women in the 1930s and 1940s. Letters that have been partially released to historians show how she wrestled with the push and pull of her faith, her family's expectations, and her personal desires. She wasn't someone who took her Catholic upbringing lightly, but she also felt She deserved the freedom to choose love on her own terms. In some letters, she reassures her mother that God is merciful and that he must understand the complexities of human love, even across religious divides. While official family statements rarely mention Kathleen's rebellious choices, some friends revealed that JFK privately admired her zest for living. Later in his life, he'd recall her sense of humor, her unwavering determination to create her own path, and her quick wit. Interestingly, her death in 1948 came only a year after his own wedding. To Jacqueline Bouvier was arranged. They were engaged in mid-1953 and married that September. But the planning and relationship building took root in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Some have speculated that her departure from the family sphere, as well as her tragic end, influenced how JFK navigated conflicts with his parents over his choice of bride. Today, Chatsworth House still stands in Derbyshire, England, a magnificent estate that was once part of Kathleen's life through her marriage to Billy, the Marquis of Hartington. Visitors can roam the halls, gaze at the grand paintings, wander through the expansive gardens, and perhaps reflect on the young American bride who once walked those corridors, trying to carve out her own identity among the British elite. Meanwhile, in the family plot at St. Peter's Churchyard in Edensor, you can find the graves of numerous Dukes of Devonshire and their relatives. Kathleen rests there beside Billy, forever joined in a marriage that lasted barely 4 months. In the years since her death, historians have pieced together bits and pieces of Kathleen's life, painting her as a woman ahead of her time, rebellious, warm, socially engaging, and defiantly unwilling to cave to tradition when her heart said otherwise. She was no saint, and she never pretended to be. She had her flaws, her rash decisions, and her stubborn pride that often put her at loggerheads with the Kennedys. But she also had a light that continues to shine in the recollections of those who encountered her, even for a short while. She belonged to a family that was simultaneously revered and reviled, dogged by rumors of corruption, nepotism, and hypocrisy, yet also admired for its philanthropy, its patriotism, and the personal charisma of people like JFK. If you ever wander through the massive library of Kennedy-themed biographies, you'll find Kathleen's name peppered among references to war heroics, political campaigns, and shimmering cocktail parties in London townhouses. Yet her chapter is so often overshadowed. Perhaps that's because she never took center stage the way her brother Jack did. Or maybe the family was so stung by her choices that they tried to keep her story quiet. But in the diaries and letters that do mention her, in the newspapers from the 1930s, that called her the most enchanting American debutante of the season, you can sense the outline of someone determined to create her own destiny. And so this is the saga of Lady Kathleen Cavendish, the rebellious Kennedy daughter, who was never meant to be overshadowed by her brothers, even though the family's collective tragedies often left her story in their wake. The truth is, she owned a piece of the spotlight in that pivotal moment leading up to World War II. She danced her way into the hearts of London society. She fought through her parents' disapproval, dared to love who she loved, and made no apologies for it. Yes, her end was scandalous and brutal, a plane crash that ended any possibility of reconciliation or redemption for all parties involved. But in that final inscription, "Joy she gave, joy she has found," there's a sense that she remains in spirit, that bright spark who refused to be extinguished by the stifling codes of her time. Because in the end, isn't that the most remarkable thing about her? Despite everything that weighed her down, she never lost the spark of life that set her apart. Call it rebelliousness, call it joie de vivre, call it courage, whatever it was. It was uniquely hers, and it blazed until the moment fate had other plans. We're left with fragments of her laughter in old photographs, lines of her letters in archived collections, and anecdotes from friends who recalled how she could make the darkest day feel sunny. That's what remains, an infectious energy that transcends the decades, reminding us that a single life, however short, can still leave an indelible impression. Her tale is a poignant reminder that even those born into privilege face battles unseen. If you found Kathleen's story compelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating narratives. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.